Shalom everyone and welcome. We will study together Parashat Shmini. Our subject for this parasha is to try to examine a theological question. Is there a religious freedom in the Torah? And what do I mean by that? Can a person initiate something, he or her, to do something that he is not exactly commanded to do? Can he add something, some kind of another stringency maybe, or another religious act in order to show his love and passion to God? Really, this issue is probably the issue that is being discussed regarding Aaron's children. So let's see what the Torah has to say. In Vayikra Perek Yud, in Leviticus chapter 10, the Torah states, Vayikchu bnei Aharon Nadav ve'Avihu ish machtato. So Aaron's children, Nadav and Avihu, they took their pans, vayitnu ba'en esh, and they put fire in it, vayasimu alea ktoret, vayakrivu lifnei Hashem, and they brought their sacrifice in front of God, esh zara, a foreign fire, asher lo tziva otam, that God did not command them to bring. Vatetze esh milifnei Hashem, and a fire came out from God, vatochal otam, and that fire, that divine fire, consumed Nadav and Avihu, vayamutu lifnei Hashem, and they died in front of God. When you look at these two psukim, these two verses, obviously there is tremendous sadness in our heart. Aharon lost two children, and it seems to be that the reason for that is pretty vague. The Torah says that they just brought a foreign fire, esh zara, asher lo tziva otam, that he didn't command them to bring. And obviously you ask yourself a very simple question. So what? So they brought something that they were not commanded, but they didn't, God forbid, bring something that was impure or in violation of the laws of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. What was so wrong in what they did? It's very interesting that the Torah is trying in a way really to hide their sin, and therefore the punishment they receive seems to be very odd. So let's try to understand, based on the different commentators, to try to understand what was their sin, what was the problem, and then what can we derive to our initial question, which was, do we have some kind of a religious freedom? So there is a Midrash Agadah that was done by our sages, who says the following: Vayikchu bnei Aharon Nadav ve'Avihu ish machtato. So Aharon's children, Nadav and Avihu, they both took that fire that they created, shnehem be'etza achat. So both of them with one advice. Basically, both of them had the same mindset doing it. Vayitnu ba'em esh. So they put fire, she'asu shelo birshut. They did something without consulting Aharon and Moshe, and definitely not asking permission from God himself. Asu shelo birshut. They didn't get the permission to do it. Amru. So what did they have in mind? Af al pi sheyarda esh min hashamayim. Even though fire came when the Mishkan was dedicated, fire came from heaven and consumed the sacrifices. So even though the fire came from heaven, mitzvah lehavim min ha'edyot. There is a mitzvah, they thought there is a mitzvah to bring fire from us, from the human beings. Shene'emar, v'natnu bnei Aaron. So this is a very interesting opinion. That's the first opinion in the Midrash. Basically, Aaron's children, Nadav and Avihu, they looked at what was going on in the first day of the tabernacle, after 8 days of preparations, and they saw that fire came from heaven. And they said, if fire comes from heaven, we also need to do something, which means we have partnership with God. We partner with God in this sanctity. However, God was very upset. He wanted to send a message, to convey a very harsh lesson. If I did not give you permission to do it, you can't do it. Which means, if we will pause here for a second, and we will think about our initial question, there is no religious freedom. You can't do whatever you want without getting some kind of a divine approval to what you are about to do. So that's the first opinion. Davar acher, a different opinion. Vayikchu bnei Aharon, and Aaron's children, Nadav and Avihu, took, mimashma shene'emar Nadav ve'Avihu, eini yodea she'em bnei Aaron. So the Midrash is asking a very good question. The Midrash says, the pasuk, the verse says, Vayikchu bnei Aharon, Nadav ve'Avihu. We know who are Aaron's children, so why do we need to say again Nadav and Avihu? Ela melamed, but it's come to teach you, shelo chalku kavod leMoshe uleAharon. So the second opinion in the Midrash does not see that the punishment was due to the lack of permission to bring the sacrifice, but rather because they did not show any honor to Moshe and Aaron. Instead of waiting for Moshe and Aaron to do something, they jumped and they said, we're going to do something. And therefore they were punished. Vayakrivu lifnei Hashem esh zara. So what does it mean? That they brought in front of God a foreign fire. Ichnisua belo ita. What does that mean? That they brought the fire prematurely. Meaning there was a time for them to bring the fire, but they chose the wrong time. The third opinion in the Midrash does not say that you need to always wait for permission, but you need to wait for the proper time. And then there is a fourth opinion in the Midrash. רבי אליעזר אומר לו, נתחייבו בני אהרון מיתה, אלא שהורו הלכה בפני משה רבן, שכל המורה הלכה בפני רבו חייב מיתה. Rabbi Eliezer says, you know why they deserve death? Because they made a halachic ruling to bring fire into the temple, into the tabernacle, without asking Moshe, who was the ultimate rabbi, who was the ultimate rav, the ultimate halachic decisor. So the fourth opinion in the Midrash basically again says that a person can come up with some kind of a religious idea of how he can get close to Hashem. However, he needs to what? He needs to pass it through someone of an authority, of a halachic authority, which is higher than him, in order to know if he's doing the right thing or not. Now, if we digress here for a second, you see that from the fact that the Midrash brings so many opinions to try to understand what exactly was Nadav and Avihu's transgression, and to understand the punishment, you see obviously that the Midrash was trying to find some kind of a justification to this very harsh punishment. And by doing so, this Midrash reveals to us his opinion about our initial question. According to the first opinion, you cannot do anything without a divine permission. According to the other opinion, yes, you can, but you need to wait for the right time. Now, how do you know what's the right time? That's a question. And then there is another opinion in the Midrash that says you don't need a divine permission, but you need to have someone of authority to tell you that what you do is correct. However, the common denominator between all the four opinions in the Midrash is that Nadav and Avihu did something that was inappropriate. Inappropriate in God's eyes, or inappropriate in the fact that they did not show any respect to the ultimate halachic decisor, which was Moshe Rabbeinu. So now, the Rashbam, Rashi, Rab Shlomo Yitzchaki's grandson, said the following: Hayom lo tziva, ולא רצה משה שיביאו אש של הדיוט, לפי שהיו מצפים לירידת אש גבוה, ולא טוב היום להביא אש זרה. Says the Rashbam, we are talking about the 8th day of the preparation for the Mishkan. We are talking now about the day of Chanukat HaMishkan, the dedication of the Mishkan, and Moshe did not want to bring fire from human beings. He, Moshe, wanted the fire to come from heaven in order to sanctify God's name, שידעו הכל כי אש בא מן השמיים, כמו שאמר אליהו, ואש לא תשימו. לפי שהיה רוצה לקדש שם שמיים בירידת האש של מעלה. Which means, Moshe Rabbeinu thought that the best idea for the first time ever that there is a service at the tabernacle, that all human beings, including him, will stay aside. They will wait for God to send fire from heaven to show that God dwells in the Mishkan. So, Nadav and Avihu, when they brought their own fire, they basically diminished the sanctity of the tabernacle. Because they brought fire, and when the people saw fire, they didn't know if the fire came from up above or it came from beneath. It came because of Nadav and Avihu. In a way, God's revelation was diminished. And this is why they deserve death, because they desecrated the name of God in the tabernacle, first time ever. According to Rashbam, there was nothing wrong in what they did if they would wait after the first revelation. Which means, if they will just stand aside and wait for God to bring the fire from heaven, consume the sacrifice, and then they will bring their own fire, everything will be perfect. Because they will not diminish, God forbid, God's revelation at the tabernacle, but rather probably will add to it. But because of what they did, now the people are confused. And the Rashbam brings a prime example from Elijah, from Eliyahu, when he had this confrontation with the 400 false prophets on the Carmel mountain. He said, do not bring fire. If I am the true prophet, the fire from heaven will come down. If you are the true prophets, a fire will come from heaven. Don't bring any fire. Because when you don't bring any fire, it's very obvious that the fire came from somewhere, which means from up above, from God himself, who desired and wanted to accept that specific sacrifice. I think this is a profound interpretation. Nadav and Avihu's transgression was diminishing God's revelation, creating a confusion in the people's eyes. They didn't know now if the fire came from heaven or it came from Nadav and Avihu. And then the revelation became vague. And then no one really knew if God's divine presence really filled the tabernacle or only partially. And that was the issue with Nadav and Avihu according to the Rashbam. In another midrash, our sages brought the opinion of Rabbi Asi bar Akiva. Rabbi Asi bar Akiva says, לא מתו נדב ואביהו, אלא שלא ליתן פתחון פה לבאי עולם, לומר לא שרתה שכינה באוהל מועד. Rabbi Asi bar Akiva says, you know why Nadav and Avihu had to die? So people will not say that the divine presence didn't dwell in the Mishkan. What does that mean? כיוון שנכנסו נדב ואביהו לפני השם באוהל מועד, because when Nadav and Avihu entered the tabernacle, the Mishkan, אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא, אם אני אאריך חפי עם אלו, יהיה כל אחד ואחד מישראל עושה כך. He says, you know what, if I will allow Nadav and Avihu just to go into the tabernacle, to do what they want to do, even though I don't have a problem with what they do, but I just never asked them to do it. If I will not do anything to stop them, everyone, every Jew, will just go into the tabernacle, bring whatever sacrifice or any other fire he wants, and then there will be zero order and it will be a chaos. מוטב ימותו נדב ואביהו ולא יתמעט כבודי אפילו שעה אחת. This is very sad. Basically, God says it's better to kill Nadav and Avihu and not to diminish my glory in people's eyes in order to keep the sanctity of this tabernacle for future generations. In a way, if no one would know about Nadav and Avihu, God, quote unquote, will not really have a problem with them going in. But Hashem's concern was, if He will allow Nadav and Avihu to do what they want, after that, people who are not in their level, people who are not that worthy, will also go into the tabernacle and do whatever they want. And then, obviously, we will reach only chaos and, God forbid, the desecration of the name of God. So this midrash basically says, in a way, Hashem had no any other option, but rather than to finish Nadav and Avihu's life in a very tragic way, but in order to teach a lesson to all the people. So if we ask our initial question, is there a way, a place, a time for some kind of religious freedom? The answer might be, it depends. If it can lead other people, or should I say it will mislead other people to do things that they can't do or they shouldn't do, the answer is definitely not. But perhaps, if in a different setting, in a different time, circumstances, your act will not influence anyone else, so then we might consider it. The Midrash in Yalkut Shimoni gives a different insight to the story of Nadav and Avihu. And it says the following. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ויקחו בני אהרון נדב ואביהו. And the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, אף הם בני אהרון בשמחתם, כיוון שראו אש חדשה שירדה משמי מרום, ולככה על מזבח את העולה ואת החלבים, עמדו להוסיף אהבה על אהבה, שנאמר ויקחו, ואין לקיחה אלא שמחה. This midrash does not really see or view Nadav's and Avihu's action in a negative way. This midrash says that they waited. When they saw that the fire came from heaven and consumed the sacrifices, they wanted to add ahava al ahava. They wanted to add, to increase the love, and therefore they wanted to what? To bring their own sacrifice. Meaning they were in some kind of exitus, which means like excitement. They were so enthused. They were so happy with what they saw. They said, you know what? We also need to bring something. So what was the problem? The problem was, again, the same issue. You couldn't do something that you were not commanded to do. But this midrash has a different insight. Unlike the midrashim before, that it seems to be that Nadav and Avihu were impetuous and they didn't wait for the fire to come from heaven, in this midrash, it says that they did. They did wait for the fire to come from heaven and to consume the sacrifice. But they were so excited, they got into some kind of almost a prophetic mood, that they said, we would like to add something to this celebration. And that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because when you are overly excited, when you are overly happy, you can do things that are maybe inappropriate. Which means the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash, they have very strict rules. It's very rigid. Who can go where? The Levim, the Kohanim, the Israelim, who can go where? Who can do what? It's not free for all. And therefore you need to control your emotions. Yes, it's true, it was tremendous happiness to see the fire comes from heaven and consume the altar and the mizbeach and the sacrifices. You know what you should do? Stand aside, be very happy, be very excited, but don't do just things out of excitement. Because whatever we do in religion, according to this midrash, needs to be very balanced. Needs to be something that was not done impetuously, but rather was done with deliberation, with some thinking. You can't just do things. Even if you are very happy and you reach a tremendous spiritual level of happiness. So this is, as I said before, a different insight. If we look at other midrashim, it seems to be that they diminished God's revelation, or they did something that was inappropriate vis-a-vis Moshe and Aaron, or they did something vis-a-vis God. Here, it's really criticism on their character. They were overly excited, and therefore it pushed them without thinking, Rega, let's pause here for just a second. What I do now, do I do it just because I'm just excited? Or do I do that because I thought about it through my cognitive abilities, and only then I add to it the emotions and the happiness? This is a difficult question, because sometimes we do things because we are excited, we are happy, we are singing, we are thrilled to do things. And now this midrash tells us, pause. Do not just be led by happiness, because that can lead to other things that maybe will lead to something that is totally inappropriate religiously. You need to try to balance between tremendous happiness, but also some kind of a thought process to see if what you do is what needed to be done. The Rambam, Maimonides, in his famous book, Moreh Nevuchim, The Guide of the Perplexed, gives a tremendous analysis of what exactly, or at least his theory, about Nadav and Avihu. And he says the following: וכאשר יבין הקדמות אמיתיות וידעם, וידע דרכי ההיקש ועשות המופת, וידע אופני השמירה מהתערות השכל. It says only after a person go through all what he called the true introductions to religion and philosophy, and you will know all the methods, the learning methods, and you will know how to make sure that your cognitive power, that your sechel, that your brain would not deviate and would not make mistakes, אז יקדים לחקירה בזה העניין, ולא יגזור בתחילת דעת שיעלה בליבו, ולא ישלח מחשבותיו תחילה וישליטם להשגת הבורא. He says, only then you can start investigating, really trying to understand who is God, what is God, how can I understand God? Because we have a tendency, says the Rambam, that whatever comes to mind, we say it, without really putting enough efforts and deliberation in order to fully, completely understand a subject. He says, אבל יבוש וימנע ויעמוד עד שיעלה ראשון ראשון. He says, if you want to try to understand philosophy, you want to start to understand God, creation, Torah, mitzvot, first you need to do it with tremendous humility. Pause, stand, stop, think. Don't let just the first thought that comes to mind to determine your decision. Most of the times, the first thought is the wrong one. And only after you think about it, you can really make a decision. If I will fast forward to the 21st century, someone sends you an email, a text, and the first thing comes to mind is, oh, I'm going to text him or her this message. Before you send it, think again. And before you send it again, think again. Is that what you want to send? How it would be understood on the other side of the person who will receive the text or the email? Says the Rambam, the same thing here. Don't just say whatever you think as a first thought. Think about it. Sit on it, sleep on it. ועל זה נאמר ויסתר משה פניו כי ירא מהביט אל האלוקים. When Moshe's first encounter with God at the burning bush, God had full revelation to Moshe. What did Moshe do? ויסתר משה פניו. He hid his face. He was afraid to jump or to skip levels of spirituality. He wanted to say, look, I am just, a beginner. I am not this seasoned prophet. I'm just a beginner. So therefore, I can't handle a full revelation. מחובר למה שיורה עליו הנראה, מפחדו להסתכל באור הנראה. לא שהשם ישיגו העיניים מתעלם מכל חסרון עילוי רב, ושובח לו עליו השלום הדבר הזה, וישפיע עליו האל יתעלם מטובו מה שחייב לו שנאמר בו ותמונת השם יביט. The Rambam says here something profound. Compare Moshe's ability to contain God's revelation at the burning bush and at the end of the Chumash. What do we see? We see a tremendous evolution in Moshe's prophetic abilities. At the beginning, Moshe was terrified. God called him and Moshe was terrified. He hid his face. At the end, Moshe talks to God like we talk to each other. How come? Says the Rambam, I'll tell you exactly how Moshe was able to achieve this ultimate prophetic level. It's because he didn't jump into conclusions. He didn't skip any stages. He went one by one. He started at the burning bush as a beginner, and then he elevated himself every day, another step, another step, another step, until he reached the ultimate prophecy. Moshe Rabbeinu is the ultimate prophet, but he didn't skip stages. In spirituality, it's so important not to skip stages, not to change your life in such a dramatic way that you can't recognize yourself, because if you don't have the roots, the foundations, and you go too fast, too high, everything will collapse. Think about it. You built a building which has 10 stories, and you didn't build the third, the fourth, and the fifth. It will all collapse. It's just a matter of time. That's what the Rambam says. So now, the Rambam talks about Nadav ve'Avihu. He says, אבנם וזכרו חכמים, אמנם אצילי בני ישראל, הם ארסו ושלחו מחשבתם והשיגו, אבל השגה בלתי שלמה. ולזה אמר עליהם ויראו את אלוקי ישראל ותחת רגליו כמעשה לבנת הספיר. Which means, the Rambam says, if you go back to Parashat Yitro, that we read a few weeks ago, the Torah describes a very strange situation, that Na'arei Bnei Israel, that the youth, or really it's the elite of the Jewish people, they also saw some kind of a revelation of God, and they were happy, vayochlu vayishtu, and they ate and they drank. Says the Rambam, they saw God's revelation, but they couldn't understand it. They thought they did. And God did not want to kill them at that time and at that moment, at the revelation on Sinai. He waited. He waited for when? That was Nadav and Avihu. He waited for them to do it at the tabernacle, because they repeated the same mistake. Which means, at the time of the revelation on Har Sinai, Nadav and Avihu saw God, but they didn't really understand exactly what they saw, and they didn't act properly. But God did not want to ruin the celebration of Mahamad Har Sinai, of the revelation on Sinai, so He waited. He waited, and now, in our Parsha, at the time of the dedication of the Mishkan, Nadav and Avihu are making the same mistake. Again, they basically skip stages of spirituality and understanding, and they bring their own thing. They think that they don't really need what? That they don't really need a commandment, guidance, direction. And that was their problem. That was their mistake. And this is why they were killed. This Rambam basically gives us tremendous insight, not only in the transgression of Nadav and Avihu, but really about religion. About how can we build ourselves into the religion. So first and foremost, we need to prepare. We need to learn, study a lot. And only after you study and you become, I would say, acquainted with the methods of learning and with the understanding that not every thought that comes to mind you just say it, but rather you try to become very deliberate. You think about what you say. You basically walk with your experience. You walk with other things that you hear. You try to sift all those opinions in your mind, and only then you can come up with some kind of a decision. This is not an impetuous religion that you just do whatever you want, you say whatever you want, you have on your mind. You need to think. So that's the first thing that you do. And B, you don't skip any stages. Religion, building your own character, nature of religion, is something that goes stage by stage. There is no skipping over any stage, because every stage is the foundation for the next one. Nadav and Avihu's issues was that they thought that they already reached a level of spirituality that they didn't. That actually they didn't. And that brought their demise. On the contrary, Moshe knew that he is not ready. Even though God revealed himself to him in a full extent, Moshe says, I'm not ready. There is nothing shameful in saying, I am not ready. You know, our rabbis in Pirkei Avot says that one of the 7 things that basically characterize a smart person is, if he doesn't know something, he would say, I don't know. If you are not ready, says, I'm not ready. Therefore, the Rambam says, Moshe says, I'm not ready. When he was ready, God had full revelation. Now, obviously, I will not deny the question. How do you know when you are ready? How anyone knows that he or she are ready for the next stage? I don't know exactly how to formulate it. I don't have a formula. But I think it's something that you can feel in your heart and in your mind, knowing that, you know what, I think I'm ready. You might be wrong. We might make a mistake. But it's definitely, you can't grow spiritually, according to the Rambam, unless you have your foundations. So that's the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch has a totally different angle on the story of Nadav and Avihu. And he says the following, אין ספק שכוונתם הייתה רצויה. I have no doubt, says Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that their intent, Nadav and Avihu's intent, was appropriate and it was desirable. שהרי הם קרויים קרוביי גם לאחר שחטאו. Because God named them קרוביי, my relatives, so to speak, people who are close to me, even after they committed the sin. וכוונה רצויה זו באה לידי ביטוי בדברי תקועת כהנים, אף הם בשמחתם, כיוון שראו אש חדשה, עמדו להוסיף אהבה על אהבה. Which means he brings this Yalkut Shimon in its Torat Kohanim. It's more of an ancient midrash that basically says that they wanted just to add love and passion to the service at the tabernacle. So, what was the problem? However, what can you do? This is a fact. בא בשעה שהאומה זכתה לגילוי קרבת השם, הרי הם חשו צורך בקורבן מיוחד משלהם. You know what's the problem, says Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch? The moment that the fire came from heaven, the entire nation, everyone, enjoyed, experienced, had the opportunity to feel this closeness to Hashem. הרי הם חשו צורך בקורבן מיוחד משלהם, ומכאן שלא פעמה בליבם רוח נכונה של כהונה. You know what was their problem? Everyone enjoys it now. Everyone sees this divine fire comes and consumes the sacrifices. Everyone is happy. Everyone is equal. Then Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's children, who are Kohanim, they feel that they need to do their own thing. They need to open up their own minyan. They need to open up their own shul. They need to bring their own sacrifice. And by doing so, not only that they separated themselves from all the nation, they separated themselves even from the tribe of Kehuna. Because what is a Kohen? Says Rab Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, כהני ישראל בטלים בכלל האומה. אין להם מעמד משלהם. כל עצמם שהם עומדים בקרב עמם, ומכאן כל מעמדם לפני השם. Says the Kohen, every Kohen basically lose his identity for the people. The Kohanim work for the people. They are not separate. Yes, they have a separate job, separate mission. But they live and they are dependent on the people. Therefore, נמצא שעצם קריבתם היה בה משום חטא. ומאידך גם קורבניו היה שלא כדין בכל פרטיו. He says basically that was their mistake. When they decided that they need to do something on their own, something that is different or above what the nation did, that's when they cease to be Kohanim. That's when they cease to be priests. They brought their own objectivity into the tabernacle. And that was the chet. That was the transgression. He says, "Achen אף הקרבת הקורבנות עצמם הייתה שלא כדין מכל בחינה." It says, even their sacrifice itself was non-halachic. Why? גם המחטות וגם האש וגם הקטורת היו בניגוד להלכה. כל כלי השרת חייבים להיות משל ציבור ולשם קודש. He says all those pans and the vessels had to come from tzibur. They had to come from the congregation. However, Bnei Aharon, they brought their own thing, their own personal utensils. And that all showed one very terrible thing. Nadav and Avihu did not think that their lot, that their position, that they need to be with all the rest of us. They tried to elevate themselves on our expense, and that was their sin against the nation and their sin against the tribe of the Kehuna. I'm skipping a bit to the 7th line. הנה זו הנקודה המבדילה בין יהדות לאליליות. Says this is the distinction between Jewish religion, between Judaism and paganism. Paganism מבקשת לשעבד את האל בקורבן, למען יעשה את רצון האדם. ואילו אישי ישראל משעבדים את האדם לעבודת השם, למען יקבל על עצמו את עול מצוותיו. He says, paganism, basically there are no rules. I bring the korban and I ask that God that I bring the sacrifice to listen to me. I demand the time, the place, the way. In Judaism, it's exactly the opposite. God is the one to tell us exactly when to bring the korban, how to bring the sacrifice, who should bring the sacrifice. When Nadav and Avihu brought their own sacrifice, they basically excluded themselves. Because even when a person brings a neder, a vow, or a nedavah, a contribution to the Mishkan, or to the Beit Mikdash, to the temple, he can't just bring it whatever he wants, whenever he wants. You want to bring a korban as a result of your will and desire to contribute something? Okay, there is a specific animal that you need to bring. There is a specific time that you need to finish the food, the eating of that sacrifice. You can't do whatever you want. God is the one to dictate to you how to bring, when to bring. It's not because God is, God forbid, concerned or afraid that people will do something wrong. It's not about God. It's about us. It's about us understanding that religion has some limits, has boundaries, has some kind of a structure. Now, in that structure, there is flexibility. But what Nadav and Avihu did, they went totally so-called out of the box. They separated themselves from the nation. They separated themselves from the tribe of Kehuna. And therefore, they separated themselves from God. The punishment, says Rab Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the last line, פעילות כהני ישראל תתבטא לא בהמצאת חידושים בתחום העבודה, אלא במתן תוקף למצוות השם. He says the activity of the priests will come to fruition and will be expressed not by making new mitzvot, not by inventing new rules, but rather by reaffirming God's commandments. So now, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch found a different sin that Nadav and Avihu did. It was not just because they brought a foreign fire or they were not commanded. It's much deeper than that. It's their misunderstanding of the power of the nation and the purpose of the tribe of the Kehuna. They tried to create a third status, nation, Kohanim, and themselves. And God says, I'm totally not interested. That's considered Esh Zara. That is considered as a foreign fire. I am not interested in that. It's not because of me. It's because of what you do. You totally misunderstood your place. You totally misunderstood your mission. And this is the main problem that Hashem has with Nadav and Avihu. They took religious freedom and they basically created their own religion, and this is where probably, according especially to Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who lived in the 19th century, where the issues with how you present religion, how do you present Judaism, what is Judaism, became a very hot topic. He says, do not invent a new religion. Try to reaffirm God's commandments. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch basically says Nadav and Avihu, their problem was they wanted to create their own religion. And that was obviously unacceptable by God in the Mishkan. Now, let's analyze a very interesting story in Tanakh. In Shmuel Bet, Samuel B, chapter 6, the Tanakh describes the procession and the ceremony of bringing the ark from where it was in Baalei Yehuda and to bring it to the Mishkan and to Yerushalayim. So the Tanakh says, Vayakom vayelech David v'chol ha'am asher ito. So David arose and he took his nation with him. מבעלי יהודה לעלות משם את ארון האלוקים אשר נקרא שם השם צבקות יושב הקרובים עליו. So they went to that place outside of Yerushalayim in order to bring the ark back. וירכיבו את ארון האלוקים, because the ark was lost during the time of the war against Plishtim. וירכיבו את ארון האלוקים אל עגלה חדשה, so they put the ark in a new wagon that they did, ויסעו מבית אבינדב אשר בגבעה. So they carry it from the house of Avinadav that was on that hill. ועוזה ואחיו בני אבינדב נוהגים גם את העגלה החדשה ויסעו מבית אבינדב אשר בגבעה עם ארון האלוקים. So they carry the wagon and the ark. ואחיו הולך לפני הארון, ודוד וכל בית ישראל משחקים לפני השם בכל עצי ברושים. So they bring the ark and David is dancing and there is music and all the people of Israel are excited. The ark is coming back. The ark returns to his home. ובכינורות ובנבלים, with violins and harps, ובתופים, with drums, ובמנענעים ובצלצלים, ויבואו עד גורן נכון. So just imagine that the ark is on a wagon, is being carried with a wagon, everyone is happy, and everyone rejoices. The ark comes home. However, ויבואו עד גורן נכון, וישלח עוזה אל ארון האלוקים, ויוחז בו כי שמתו הבקר. עוזה, one of David's friends, sees that the ark is about to fall from the wagon. They probably carried the wagon and it was about to fall. And he jumps to do what? To hold the ark so it will not fall. So you would think that Uzzah did a wonderful thing. Vayicharaf Hashem be'Uzzah. Hashem's rage came after Uzzah. Vayakeu sham Elokim al hashal vayamot sham im aron Elokim. Uzzah died. Uzzah was killed. Hashem killed Uzzah. Obviously, you ask yourself, Rega, let's stop for a second. I don't understand it. What wrong did he do? What is better for the ark to fall on the floor? Is that what God wants? Take a look at the Malbim. הוסיף עוזה לפשוע במה ששלח ידו לאחוז הארון. Uzzah made a tremendous transgression by thinking that reaching out to the Aron with his hands and to stop it from falling, that he's doing a mitzvah. בחושבו שצריך סמך בא להתמוטט, thinking that the ark cannot quote unquote take care of itself. והיה לו לדעת כי השם השוכן בו נושא לא נישא. He had to know that Hashem is in the ark. Hashem is not being carried. Hashem carries the wagon. אמרו חז"ל, נושאיו נשא את עצמו לא כל שכן. He says the ark does not need a wagon, does not need anyone to help the ark not to fall. God himself dwells in this ark, and he can take care of himself. Uzzah did something that is so similar to Nadav and Avihu. Basically underestimate God and underestimate the Mishkan and the Aron, the ark. What Uzzah did by quote unquote helping God not to fall, he basically sent a very terrible lesson to the Jewish people. God cannot take care of himself, which is basically sacrilegion. This is basically the desecration of the name of God. God can take care of himself very well. And by doing that, Uzzah diminished the sanctity of God. So now, let's go and try to understand different options to our question about religious freedom. I think that I'm not sure, I would put it like that we have a formula, but we definitely have a lot of food for thoughts. We understand that we cannot just base our religion on feelings of happiness and joy. It needs to be processed. It needs to be cognitively processed. It needs to be deliberate. It needs to be slow. You can't skip stages. You also need to know that there are halachic authorities that you need to have get their guidance. According to some opinions, you can really need to wait for a divine permission to do something. You also need to know the ramifications, the consequences of your action. You might be in that level, in that sphere, but other people who see you who are not there can just try to imitate you while they are not worthy. We need to take a lot into consideration when we think about our religion. So, Nadav and Avihu, by their death, are teaching us a tremendous lesson. Even though they were Aaron's children, and they were probably Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, as our rabbis in the Midrashim says that Nadav and Avihu might be even greater in potential than Moshe and Aaron. But even they made a mistake. And they paid a very, very harsh punishment. They paid with their lives. So, this class, this shiur, does not mean to scare you, but it means to encourage each one of us that before we make a decision religiously, we need to think about it. We need perhaps to console with other people. And always, always build your foundations. When you build your foundation, one after another, you will reach the ultimate spiritual levels. Thank you.